Have you ever walked away from someone who didn't even flinch? They showed no emotion, no concern, made no attempt to stop you. Your absence created nothing but silence. You thought you meant something, but in that moment of departure, it felt like you meant nothing at all. That silence can be deafening, that indifference devastating. But here's the fascinating truth about human nature that few understand. The impact of your absence often takes time to manifest. The void you leave behind doesn't immediately announce itself. It whispers first, then speaks, and eventually it might scream. Today we're going to explore the profound psychological journey that unfolds when you remove yourself from someone's life who took your presence for granted. We'll examine why people fail to value what they have until it's gone, the stages they experience after your departure, and most importantly, how understanding this pattern can free you from the chains of seeking validation from those who couldn't see your worth. This isn't about revenge or satisfaction at someone else's pain. It's about understanding a fundamental truth that can liberate you from the cycle of seeking approval from those who won't give it until it's too late. The moment you walk away is just the beginning of a story that continues long after you've turned the page. The illusion of permanence. Human beings are remarkably adaptable creatures. We quickly normalize our surroundings, our relationships, our daily experiences. What once brought us joy or excitement becomes our baseline expectation. The psychological term for this is hedonic adaptation, our tendency to return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events. This adaptation serves us well in many contexts. It helps us adjust to new environments and cope with change. But it has a significant downside in our relationships. We begin to take people for granted. When someone is consistently present in our lives, reliable, supportive, loving, we often fail to actively appreciate them. Their presence becomes like oxygen, essential but invisible, noticed only in its absence. Think about your own experience. How often do you consciously appreciate the people who are consistently there for you? How frequently do you acknowledge their value in your life? Most of us recognize this value sporadically at best. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's human nature. We don't continually register what remains constant. Our attention is drawn to change, to disruption, to the unusual. This attentional bias makes evolutionary sense. We need to notice potential threats or opportunities, but it creates a blind spot when it comes to valuing the constants in our lives. The people who didn't care when you left may not have been deliberately callous. They were caught in this illusion of permanence, the unexamined belief that what is present now will always be available to them. The initial response, the defense mechanism. When you first remove yourself from someone's life, particularly if you've been a significant presence, their immediate reaction often isn't grief or regret. Instead, many respond with what psychologists would recognize as defense mechanisms. Some might respond with dismissal, "It's not a big deal." Others might reframe the situation to protect their ego. "I was going to end things anyway." Some might even express anger or contempt. "I'm better off without them." These reactions aren't necessarily reflective of their true feelings or the actual value they placed on your relationship. They're protective measures, ways of managing the immediate discomfort of change. Pride is particularly powerful in this initial phase. Many people would rather preserve their self-image than acknowledge they've lost something valuable. They convince themselves they've made the right choice in letting you go, or that your departure is inconsequential. This pride-driven response can be especially pronounced if the relationship had power dynamics at play. If someone was accustomed to having the upper hand, if they were used to your consistent effort, your forgiveness, your accommodation, their ego may prevent them from immediately recognizing what they've lost. Social pressure compounds this effect. In a culture that often equates vulnerability with weakness, publicly acknowledging regret or mistake can feel threatening. It's easier to present an unbothered facade to the world, and sometimes even to oneself. This is why the person who dismissed your departure with a shrug may not be experiencing what they project. The calm exterior often masks internal conflict they're not yet ready to confront. The false replacement period. Following the initial defensive response, many people enter what we might call a false replacement period. This is when they attempt to fill the void you've left with substitutes that can never quite replicate what's been lost. They might throw themselves into new relationships, seeking to prove, primarily to themselves, that you were easily replaceable. They might become unusually social, surrounding themselves with people to mask the absence of depth. Some might pursue distractions, work, hobbies, travel, anything to avoid confronting the empty space. This period can be particularly deceptive because from the outside, especially through the curated lens of social media, it might appear they're thriving without you. They may seem happier, more active, more fulfilled. This performance serves a dual purpose. It convinces others they're doing fine, and more critically, it temporarily convinces them too. But replacements are rarely equivalent. A person who provided genuine understanding, consistent support, or unconditional acceptance creates a particular shaped void when they leave. Trying to fill that void with superficial connections or distractions is like trying to fill a square hole with round pegs. Something will always be missing. The more unique and authentic your connection was, the more difficult you are to replace. Generic relationships are substitutable, specific deep connections are not. This false replacement period can last weeks, months, sometimes even years. Its duration depends on the person's self-awareness, their capacity for honest introspection, and how successfully they can maintain the illusion that nothing meaningful was lost. The quiet realization when your absence begins to echo. Eventually, the noise of defense mechanisms and false replacements begins to fade. The distractions become less effective. The substitutes reveal their inadequacy. And in the subsequent quiet, your absence begins to echo. This happens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. It emerges in small moments of contrast between what is and what was. Perhaps they encounter a challenge they once would have discussed with you. Maybe they experience a triumph with no one who truly understands its significance. Or they might simply have a thought or feeling that you would have appreciated in a way no one else can. These moments accumulate. The frequency with which they think of you, often unconsciously at first, increases. The comparisons between their current reality and the one that included you become more common, more pronounced. What makes this phase particularly significant is that it's often the first time they're genuinely experiencing your absence rather than reacting to it or trying to compensate for it. The defensive walls have weakened, the distractions have grown thin. They're beginning to see the actual shape of what's been lost. This realization rarely arrives as a dramatic epiphany. It's not a sudden breakdown or moment of clarity. It's more like gradually waking from a dream, a slow, cumulative recognition that something valuable has been lost. For some, this recognition comes through contrast with new relationships. They begin to notice what these new connections lack compared to what they had with you. For others, it emerges through personal growth. As they evolve, they develop a greater capacity to recognize and appreciate what you offered. This is a vulnerable period. The pride that once protected them has softened. The noise that drowned out their thoughts has quieted. And in that space, regret often makes its first appearance. The painful comparison, what they lost versus what they have. As awareness of your absence deepens, a new phase begins, conscious comparison. Now fully cognizant of what's been lost, they begin evaluating their current reality against what they had with you. This isn't just about romantic relationships. This applies to friendships, family relationships, and collegial bonds as well. We often fail to recognize the unique value in any significant relationship until we have the perspective of its absence. During this phase, specific qualities you possessed become painfully apparent through their absence. Your consistency versus the unreliability they now encounter. Your depth of understanding versus the superficial connections they've settled for. Your authentic support versus the conditional acceptance they receive elsewhere. Your unique perspective versus the echo chambers they've found themselves in. These comparisons aren't fleeting thoughts, but recurring recognitions. Each new disappointment, each unmet expectation in their current relationships serves as another reminder of what they once had with you. What makes this phase particularly difficult is the dawning understanding that what was lost wasn't just a person, but a particular type of relationship, one built on history, mutual understanding, shared experiences, and established trust. These elements cannot be instantly recreated with someone new, no matter how promising a new connection might be. For those with sufficient self-awareness, this period brings humbling insights. They begin to see how they failed to recognize your value while you were present. They may realize how their behavior contributed to your departure. They might acknowledge how they took for granted qualities in you that they now recognize as rare and precious. This is when the first genuine sense of loss typically emerges, not the reactionary emotion of being left, but the authentic grief of understanding what's no longer in their life. The recognition of growth, seeing your evolution from afar. While they've been experiencing your absence and perhaps struggling with its implications, you've been on your own journey. You've been healing, growing, evolving, often in ways that become visible from a distance. There's something particularly powerful about witnessing someone's growth from afar. When we're in daily contact with people, changes happen so gradually, they're often imperceptible, but distance creates contrast. It allows for before and after comparisons that highlight transformation. If you've used the period following your departure for self-development, whether that's building confidence, pursuing goals, healing old wounds, or simply creating a life that better reflects your values, these changes are often evident to those watching from a distance. They might see it in your social media presence, hear about it through mutual connections, or simply sense it if your paths briefly cross. You carry yourself differently. You speak with new confidence. Your life reflects choices made for yourself rather than in reaction to others. This observed growth often triggers a complex reaction. There's potential admiration for what you've become, perhaps regret for not being part of that journey, and sometimes discomfort at the implicit contrast with their own stagnation. For many who failed to value you appropriately, your visible growth following your departure serves as powerful evidence that the problem wasn't your worth, but their ability to recognize it. Your thriving in their absence becomes inadvertent proof of what they failed to nurture when they had the chance. This is often when the narrative they've been telling themselves, that your relationship wasn't that significant, that your departure wasn't a loss, begins to crumble more visibly. It's difficult to maintain the fiction that someone was unimportant when their absence from your life coincides with a period of obvious flourishing in theirs. The attempts to reconnect, testing the waters. As recognition deepens and comparisons become more painful, many people begin contemplating reconnection. They want to test whether the door they allowed to close remains even slightly ajar. These attempts at reconnection take many forms, varying in directness and vulnerability. The casual social media interaction, a like on a post, a brief comment, a reaction to a story. The seemingly innocuous message, Just saw something that reminded me of you, or hope you're doing well. The mutual friend inquiry, asking others about you, perhaps floating the idea of a group get-together. The meaningful date acknowledgement, reaching out on birthdays, anniversaries, or other significant dates. The direct acknowledgement, a more vulnerable message addressing the past and expressing regret. These attempts serve multiple purposes. They're partly testing your receptiveness to communication. They're also often a way of easing conscience, of demonstrating to themselves that they're making some effort to address a recognized mistake. What's important to understand about these reconnection attempts is what they typically don't include. A full acknowledgement of how they failed to value you, a genuine apology for specific behaviors, or any recognition of the growth you've undergone since the separation. Initial reconnection attempts are usually tentative, designed to minimize vulnerability and risk of rejection. They leave room for plausible deniability. If rebuffed, they can tell themselves and others they were just being friendly rather than seeking to re-establish a meaningful connection. These attempts often come with unstated expectations, that you'll respond with enthusiasm, that you'll make the process easy for them, that you'll be the same person they remember rather than someone who has potentially outgrown the dynamic they're trying to recreate. For the person who has moved forward, these attempts can be jarring. They arrive unexpectedly, often just as you've established a new equilibrium. They ask you to revisit a closed chapter without always offering compelling reasons why you should. The idealization phase, remembering only the good. A curious psychological phenomenon often accompanies these reconnection attempts: selective memory. The person who didn't care when you left suddenly seems to remember only the good aspects of your relationship. This isn't necessarily manipulative or intentional. Human memory is remarkably plastic. We continuously revise our recollections, particularly of emotional experiences. When someone is feeling the absence of a relationship, their mind naturally emphasizes what's been lost rather than what was problematic. They might wax nostalgic about shared experiences, conveniently forgetting the tensions that surrounded them. They might reminisce about how well you understood them, overlooking how they failed to offer the same understanding in return. They might express missing specific qualities of yours, without acknowledging how they failed to appreciate those qualities when they had daily access to them. This selective remembering serves a psychological purpose. It justifies their renewed interest while protecting their self-image. It's easier to frame the situation as, "I miss this wonderful connection we had," than "I failed to value someone important until they were gone." For you, hearing this revisionist history can be disorienting. It might not align with your experience of the relationship or your reasons for leaving. It can even make you question your own memories and decisions, a form of unintentional gaslighting where their newly positive narrative challenges your lived experience. This idealization often extends beyond memories to you as a person. They may place you on a pedestal, attributing qualities to you that reflect their needs rather than your reality. In their mind, you've become less a person and more a symbol of what they believe they're missing. The reality of changed dynamics, power shifts. Perhaps the most significant yet least discussed aspect of this entire process is the fundamental shift in relationship dynamics that occurs when someone finally recognizes your value after dismissing your departure. When you were present and they were indifferent, they held disproportionate power. Your consistent effort, interest, or availability created an imbalance they likely exploited, consciously or not. Your needs might have been minimized, your boundaries tested, your value questioned. When you walked away and they didn't care, that power dynamic appeared to continue. Their indifference seemed to communicate that they remained in control, that your presence or absence was inconsequential to them. But when they eventually recognize your value and attempt to reconnect, something profound happens. The power dynamic reverses. Suddenly, they're the ones seeking your attention. They're the ones making efforts previously reserved for you. They're the ones whose messages might go unanswered, whose interest might not be reciprocated. This reversal can be disorienting for both parties. For them, it represents an unfamiliar vulnerability. For you, it offers validation, but potentially triggers old patterns or expectations. What's crucial to understand is that this new dynamic isn't simply the old relationship with reversed roles. The context has fundamentally changed. You've both had experiences that have shaped you. The relationship, if resumed, would need to be rebuilt rather than simply continued. For many who experience this shift, the temptation is to use this new power to secure validation that was previously withheld, to finally receive the recognition and appreciation they desired. While understandable, this approach often leads to temporary satisfaction rather than sustainable connection. The healthier perspective recognizes that balanced relationships don't involve power struggles, but mutual respect and reciprocity. The question isn't who has the upper hand, but whether both parties are equally valued. Why this happens? The psychology behind delayed appreciation. To fully understand this pattern, we need to examine the psychological principles that drive it. Why do people so often fail to value something until it's gone? The first factor is availability bias. We undervalue what's consistently available to us. When something or someone is reliably present, we assume they'll always be there. This creates a form of complacency, where we don't need to actively appreciate or invest in what seems guaranteed. The second factor is negativity bias. Our tendency to focus more on negative aspects of our experience than positive ones. In relationships, this means we're often more attuned to minor irritations or unmet expectations than to consistent support or compatibility. We fixate on what's wrong rather than recognizing what's right. The third factor is what psychologists call the contrast effect. We often need the contrast of absence to fully perceive what was present. Like a fish unaware of water until removed from it, we may not recognize the value of certain relationships until they're no longer surrounding us. The fourth factor involves self-perception and ego. Acknowledging someone's value often means acknowledging our own failure to appreciate them adequately. This creates cognitive dissonance, discomfort when our actions contradict our self-image as a good, aware person. Rather than face this discomfort, many people initially deny the value of what they've lost. The fifth factor is future discounting, our tendency to value immediate rewards over future benefits. In relationships, this manifests as prioritizing momentary comfort, avoiding difficult conversations, maintaining the status quo, over the long-term benefit of properly valuing those who matter. Understanding these psychological factors doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps explain why even otherwise perceptive people can fall into this pattern. It's not always intentional cruelty, but often unconscious human tendencies that lead to this belated recognition of value. What this reveals about them and about relationships. When someone doesn't care when you leave but later recognizes your value, it reveals important truths about them and about relationship dynamics in general. First, it often indicates a person who lives reactively rather than proactively. They respond to what's happening rather than anticipating consequences or recognizing value in the moment. This reactive stance affects not just how they handled your relationship, but likely how they approach much of life. Second, it suggests a person who struggles with genuine appreciation. Appreciation isn't just a feeling but a practice, the active acknowledgement of value. Those who can't appreciate what's present often cycle through relationships, constantly seeking but never finding lasting satisfaction. Third, it reveals someone whose self-awareness may be limited. They may lack the introspection necessary to recognize their own patterns, needs, and contributions to relationship dynamics. Without this awareness, they're likely to repeat similar mistakes in the future. Fourth, it often points to someone who confuses convenience with compatibility. They may have valued how you fit into their life more than who you fundamentally are. Your departure forced them to distinguish between these factors. As for relationships more broadly, this pattern reveals how often we build connections on unspoken expectations rather than clear communication. It shows how frequently we assume permanence rather than recognizing the ongoing investment all meaningful relationships require. Perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates how relationships often serve as mirrors, reflecting back aspects of ourselves we might otherwise miss. Your absence created a mirror that showed them truths they couldn't or wouldn't see while you were present. What to do if they come back? The crossroads of choice. If you find yourself at this juncture, where someone who didn't care when you left now wants to return to your life, you face a significant choice. This moment isn't just about them and their realization, it's about you and your boundaries. First, consider your own growth. The period following your departure likely involved healing, self-discovery, and forward movement. Any decision about reconnection should prioritize protecting this growth rather than risking regression into old patterns. Second, assess their awareness. There's a vast difference between someone who says, "I miss you," and someone who can articulate specifically how they failed to value you and what they've learned from that failure. True change requires genuine insight, not just emotional reaction to your absence. Third, observe their consistency. Momentary recognition of your value during a low point in their life differs fundamentally from sustained appreciation. Has their perspective actually transformed, or are they simply responding to temporary circumstances? Fourth, trust your intuition. Your body and subconscious mind often register warnings your conscious mind might override. If reconnection creates anxiety, tension, or a sense of constriction, those feelings deserve serious consideration. Fifth, remember that forgiveness doesn't necessitate reunion. You can release anger and resentment without re-establishing active connection. Sometimes the healthiest response to someone's belated appreciation is compassionate distance. If you do choose to allow someone back into your life, consider establishing clear terms for this new connection. This isn't about punishment, but about creating healthy parameters that respect both your growth and their potential for change. Whatever you decide, remember that their delayed recognition of your value doesn't obligate you to respond in any particular way. Their realization is their journey. Your response is yours. The wisdom of walking away. What your departure taught you. Both, regardless of whether reconnection occurs, there's profound wisdom in what transpired, lessons valuable for both parties. For them, your departure potentially taught that presence shouldn't be taken for granted, that value often becomes visible only through contrast, that indifference can permanently close doors, that growth continues for others even when we're not witnessing it, that meaningful connection requires active investment. For you, the experience may have revealed that your worth doesn't depend on others' recognition, that leaving situations where you're undervalued creates space for growth. That how people respond to your departure often confirms the wisdom of your decision. That healthy relationships involve mutual appreciation, not one-sided effort. that you're capable of prioritizing your own well-being, even when difficult. These lessons represent significant growth opportunities. They're not simply intellectual understandings, but embodied wisdom gained through experience. This wisdom, particularly when consciously recognized, can transform how both parties approach future relationships. Even if no reconciliation occurs, even if contact remains severed, the experience has potential value. Sometimes the most important relationships in our growth aren't those that endure, but those that teach us what we need to move forward. Conclusion: beyond vindication to freedom. There's a certain vindication when someone who didn't care when you left eventually recognizes your value. It can feel like confirmation that you weren't wrong about your worth, just surrounded by someone unable to see it clearly. But the greater victory isn't this external validation. It's the internal freedom that comes from no longer needing it. True liberation arrives when you can observe their belated appreciation without it significantly affecting your sense of self. When you can wish them well on their journey of realization without feeling responsible for helping them navigate it. When you can acknowledge the significance of the relationship in your life story without needing to recreate or fix it. The most powerful outcome isn't making someone regret losing you. It's reaching a place where their regret or lack thereof no longer dictates your choices or impacts your peace. It's continuing your journey of growth regardless of whether they ever fully understand what they missed. In the end, the story isn't about them finally seeing your value. It's about you recognizing it all along and having the courage to walk toward a life that reflects that truth, whether they ever catch up to that reality or not. Your worth was never determined by their ability to recognize it. Their delayed realization doesn't validate what was always true, and your future isn't constrained by their belated understanding of what they lost. You were valuable before they noticed. You remained valuable when they didn't care. And you'll continue being valuable regardless of whether they ever fully comprehend what was right in front of them all along.